Bottle Williams.
Mr Chair, thank you very much. Mr Chair, Part 1, Section 3A talks about the purpose of this particular piece of legislation, and having been a member of the Select Committee that heard the submissions, I'm very keen for the passage of this legislation, but I want to talk about the actual purpose. So there are four main articles in the purpose, which actually describe a bit of a journey that this nation has taken in terms of its smoke-free legislation. But this Section 3A talks about discouraging people from taking up smoking in the first place. The second part of it is actually, if you are a smoker, actually giving you the tools and the ability to give up smoking. And if you are one of those lucky people who have reformed and given up smoking, the third part of this actually looks at supporting you to stay smoke-free. And then the fourth part of this really is about ensuring that those people who are non-smokers are actually not exposed to second-hand smoke. So the purpose of this bill, as I say, has got a long gestation, and there's quite a whakapapa of legislation that's brought us to this point. So we as a nation have really been coming on a journey to becoming increasingly smoke-free, as we ought to. Part 1 also talks, Mr Chair, it brings into the discussion the vernacular of the industry. We actually start talking about quit programs as opposed to stopping smoking or giving up smoking, because quit is actually associated with the smoke-free industry. There are quit coaches who help you to give up smoking. There's Quitline, which is the online service, the telephone service that helps you to give up smoking. So I'm really pleased that in this legislation we decided to use the jargon of the industry and put quit in the legislation. It's not normal to use terminology like that, but I'm really pleased that we've done that in this case. And having a sister who is a quit coach, I felt it was really important to be able to signify that we knew exactly what we were talking about in terms of the industry supporting people to give up smoking. Section 21, this is where we start to look at the difference between plain packaging and standardised packaging. And it was really important to make this point because plain packaging actually is a misnomer. Plain packaging does not adequately describe what we are talking about here. Plain packaging seems to describe, clear white packaging, but standardised packaging has actually got some requirements within the legislation. So standardised packaging looks at several considerations. It looks at the graphics that will be on the packaging. It looks at the colour of the packaging, what the warning messages will be, and the warning messages have to have things like messages that will be likely to get consumers to reduce their uptake of smoking, and it's got to be ensuring that any false perceptions about the harmful effects of tobacco products are diminished. So standardised packaging, it also refers to where the producer's logo goes on the particular packet. Section 32 says quite clearly what the packaging must include. So the messaging has to be about outlining the harmful effects of smoking and the benefits of quitting smoking. It also has to list all the harmful constituent chemicals and ingredients in the smoke and the respective quantities of those ingredients within the smoke. And it talks about the graphics as well. Section 32.2.1b actually talks about leaf tobacco, tobacco that you get in pouches, I guess. That information has to be available, but because you don't have the cardboard packaging, that has to be included on a leaflet within the tobacco itself. Section 36 actually increases the penalties in respect of any offence, Mr Chair. Mr Chair. Mr Chair. Mr
Potter
Chair.
Williams.
Thank you. Section 36 increases...
A point of order, Ron Mark. I apologise.
Yeah, I just wondering, Mr Chairman, normally the chair does rotate across the different parties. We've had 4 speakers from Labor, one after the other. Is there a change to protocol procedures?
Well, actually we don't alternate round, especially with parties which have a lot fewer members than other parties. It is a matter of generally sharing proportionately. I do listen carefully to members' speeches to see whether or not they're speaking relevantly when I decide whether or not to give them another call. This member was, as other members generally have been. The member is on my list to get a call. I've noted that he's going for it, but I think he's also been round. He's also been round long enough to know that it is disorderly to question the chair as to who gets a call. Potter Williams.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Section 36, as I was saying, Mr Chair, is in respect of offences, the increase in penalties. If you're a manufacturer, importer or a distributor, you can receive a fine not exceeding $600,000. A large retailer, for example, can receive a fine not exceeding $200,000, and in any other case, which will be a small retailer, a fine not exceeding $50,000. Section 30A3, which is a small but very interesting part of the legislation, it restricts the sale of loose or single cigarettes. Now that's particularly problematic for young people, people starting smoking, children for example, and there is a relevant section 36 which looks at the penalties should you be a retailer who is selling single cigarettes, and that fine is $2,000. There are some transitional provisions which allow for not only distributors but retailers to have a period of time to work through stock that is non-standardised to the new standardised stock, and for distributors that's a 6-week period, and for retailers that's 12 weeks. I just want to make a couple more comments, Mr Chairman. Firstly, about the submitters. There were quite a few submitters from retailers, from grocers and the like. Some of them were on form submissions. They talked about the standardisation of the packaging causing some confusion within the retail environment. So they said that this would increase confusion, they might sell the wrong product, it would increase delays in actually serving customers. There were high numbers of submitters from around the country who were very supportive of the legislation, who talked quite emotionally about how smoking had impacted them and their families. And then there were some submitters, Mr Chair, who actually wanted us to go further and consider banning smoking in cars. The last point I want to make, I guess, Mr Chairman, is having sat on the Select Committee under the chairmanship of Dr Paul Hutchison. It was a good committee. It was one of the first pieces of legislation I was involved in as a new member to the House, but we were inevitably delayed bringing the bill back to the House for further debate, because it is my belief that the government was waiting to see what the WTO decision was going to be with the Australian government around their legislation. We had an opportunity to talk to the Australian officials about their legislation and how effective it had been, and at the time there was only anecdotal evidence that was available, but it was actually quite compelling that even in the early days that the standardised packaging that they had introduced was making an impact on smoking rates in that country. And I'm very pleased that this legislation has come back to the House, that we are debating this through committee stages now, and I commend it to the House.
Oh, Ron Mark.